Ain't going back, not gonna buy into all that. Hey, hey, ain't gonna hide, gonna let all the fears slide. Got mother nature, it's on my side. Got a whole of the loving growing inside.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to the New Now. I'm delighted to have Jerry back with us and our secret guest, Anon, a recovered psychiatric patient. And we're going to be discussing further along the lines of mind monsters, what they mean, how to get over them. And I'm here again, as I mentioned, with Jerry, retired psychotherapist, 35 years in some of the craziest, if you'll pardon the pun, institutions in the world. And Jerry, let's get right into it. Hello, everyone.
Okay, I just kind of want to do a short introduction. I'm glad that I mean, it takes a lot of guts to do what Anon is doing. He is a engineer, so he's gone from being psychiatric hospitalized for I think 4 weeks as a young man, like 30 years ago or something like that, to getting rid of the voices, to becoming an engineer. And one thing I want to hammer on is that, you know, schizophrenics have been trying to tell psychiatry and the rest of us for decades that the voices are very real. They're not hallucinations. For their effort, what they got was shunned. They got drugged up and they got locked up. They've been told by psychiatry, without any research into the matter whatsoever, that the voices are hallucinations, that their brains are broken, and that they have a chemical imbalance in their brain. Now, that was something made up by the big pharma companies to sell drugs, this chemical imbalance bullcrap. It's been disproven for a long time, but they're still pushing it. You know, there's a lot of research come out recently that just throws it back in their face, says this is bull. It always has been bull, and it's just, you know, you've dreamt that up to sell drugs, and it is totally disproven at this time. You know, not only, you know, those of you who are going to a psychiatrist for schizophrenia and been told that you have a chemical imbalance in your brain, notice that your psychiatrist had never given you any kind of test to test what is out of balance in your brain or how much. You know, the reason is they don't have one. It doesn't exist. They don't even know what the chemical balance of the brain should be. Yet Big Pharma is pushing this in millions and millions of dollars worth of advertisement. They're making, I think, $34 billion a year on the sale of antipsychotic drugs, I think, just in the US. And these drugs are toxic. They're telling schizophrenics, there is no recovery. This is a lifetime illness. You got it. You're going to have to take these drugs for the rest of your life. That's all there is to it. Yeah. You're not going to go into a psychiatrist's office and come out without a prescription for some kind of drug. So what, and I'll let Anon get into the details of this. What these voices are is they're energetic, parasitic entities. Right? They're invisible. There is no time. There is no space where they are. They can be in two places at the same time. And they're kind of like a magnetic field. If you had a big magnet, you're holding it in your hand, you wouldn't be able to see or feel, touch, or smell that magnetic field. It would be invisible and undetectable to you. You know? Now you get a jar full of iron filings, you put that over the magnetic field, and the magnetic field will appear. You'll see it. Okay, these things are the same way. The only way you know them is by the reaction they cause in physical reality or in the mental state. And these patterns are completely repetitive. They go over and over and over again. It's like these things were all made in the same cookie cutter. The voices are telling patients, you know, here in Arizona, 2,500 miles away from where I worked at the state hospital in Georgia, they're telling them the same things. It's the same stuff over and over and over again. It's like they were all made from the same cookie cutter. Now, I'm going to go through these patterns, and this is how you know what they are. This is the manifestation they have in physical reality. They're consistently negative. You know, always. It's always negative stuff. It's always rotten stuff. It's always insulting stuff, badgering, mocking, cajoling. It's always negative. You have to ask yourself, what holds this thing on a negative trajectory? Why isn't it random like all other hallucinations? Why isn't it all over the place like regular hallucinations? Why is it consistently negative? And what holds it there? You know, second one is these voices are consistently anti-religious. They hate preachers, they hate church, they hate the 23rd Psalm, the Lord's Prayer, and they hate Muslim church and clerics. They're constantly anti-religious. They go nuts when the patient walks into a church. The voices get louder, or they shut up, or they drive the person out of the church. What kind of hallucination would give a darn about church? No, this is a consistent reaction. You talk to any schizophrenic who tried to go to church, and they'll tell you these things go nuts when they walk into a church. Why would a hallucination do that? Why would it even care? They constantly work to create negative emotion. Right? That's what they feed off of, negative emotional energy. They have to turn your emotion negative before they can take your energy. And you talk to schizophrenics, they'll tell you after an attack by the voices, their energy level drops to nothing. And you ask them, did you use it? And they'll say, no, I didn't use it. Half the time they're laying in bed all night, tossing and turning while the voices are attacking them. In the morning, they get up and they say, I feel like I've been working out in the hot sun all day with a pick and shovel. Where did their energy go? So they energetically drain their victims. That's why they are constantly putting nasty stuff in there. A lot of times, these voices sound just like the regular voices you hear all day long, except their intent is very different. They have a very negative intent. They want to get the person in trouble. They want to get him in fights. They want to break him off from contact with anybody. They want them isolated, so they're in their bedroom by themselves, just listening to the voices. Mothers, dads gone, everybody's gone. They want to isolate the individual. They do to us what we do to cows. People eat food, they generate energy. The cows eat grass, they generate milk. We bring the cows in, the farmer isolates them, milks them. It's exactly what these things are doing to schizophrenics. The voices get louder when ignored. Psychiatry will tell their patient, oh, just ignore them, they're hallucinations. No, they get louder. Consistently will get louder over and over again. They foster self-destructive behavior. So, they'll get schizophrenics to trip themselves up, to sabotage themselves, to quit school, to stop taking their drugs. They'll do whatever they can to trip them up to generate that negative emotional energy. They demand the attention of the victim. So it's a battle for the victim's attention, the voices versus the victim.
Kind of sounds like what they've done to everyone over the last few years. Isolate them, put them in a box so they can only listen to bad boys. Yep. Seems like they've made the whole world into an institution, in my opinion.
Exactly right. You look through these facets here, and they're exactly the same thing that the deep state is doing to us over mainstream media right now.
I agree.
So they maneuver for increased control over their victims. So that they want more and more and more control, and they just constantly are chipping away to get more control. To do that, they have to isolate the individual. They manipulate perception. Lots of schizophrenics, somebody's laughing in the park or something. They go, oh, they're laughing at me. What are they laughing at? So they'll change your perception into the worst possible interpretation of reality. One thing that's really odd is they have complete access to the schizophrenic's memory. They can go in there, they can pull up any rotten thing they've ever done, bring it up to their attention, and say, look at what you did. You killed a bird, or you stole a quarter, and just rub it in the person's face forever. They demand the victim not tell anybody else about their presence. They don't like that. They want it to be secret. They don't want schizophrenics telling their mom, their dad, anybody what they're telling them. Okay.
And it kind of sounds like they've made the whole world into a schizophrenic institution from those very definitions from so many people I've talked with over the last many weeks, whether they're a regular person being, a farmer or writing a book on this topic, or even just holding down a regular job. Everyone, and I can put myself in that pile, so to speak, have had those experiences of one extreme or another exactly like that my whole life, which is very interesting.
Well, they hit us all. I mean, they hit us all to different degrees depending on your frequency. One thing that's interesting, if you can shut them up temporarily by snapping a rubber band. and I've been told on your wrist. And I've been told that that hurts the voices a whole lot more than it hurts the person. But it doesn't get rid of them permanently. It just, if we give them an exercise to work on, when the voices appear, the voices just they're there for so long, so often, that they just become part of the chatter, and the person often forgets. So as soon as they realize they're hearing voices, they can snap the rubber band and then do the exercises to beat these things back. They're consummate liars. You can't believe anything they say. You can't make bargains with them. You can't believe anything. And if they do tell you the truth, it's only to wrangle you back around later and turn on you. Lots of times when they first show up in people, they act like they're friends or angels or something special, or they can give them some special power or tell them things. And once they rope them in, then they start turning on them. Ouija boards and meth will bring them on like gangbusters. You don't want to be dealing with either one of those things. They consistently steer their victim away from anything that might generate joy. They don't want the person to be happy. They constantly manipulate feeling without even speaking. You could be sitting around feeling fine. All of a sudden you get this heavy feeling over you and you go, where did that come from? They short circuit reason. They love the person to be bored. Boredom is the worst thing a schizophrenic could do, is get bored. They pass themselves as thoughts belonging to the victim. So we're all, from the time we're born, any thought that comes into your head belongs to you. No, that's not true. That's not true by a long shot. So they act like they're your thoughts. And what I've been told is if they're caught, they're punished. So they want to blend in. They're like a lion in the jungle. They blend in with all your other thoughts. And every once in a while, they'll throw some garbage into your thought stream.
What do you mean by punished? How do they get punished? I'm sorry to interrupt here, but that's so interesting.
No, that's all right. There appears to be a tier thing with them. So I've heard stories of where one voice wasn't doing a good enough job with one girl, and that one got pulled and a meaner one got thrown in there. I've had one directly tell me that if they're discovered, they're punished and they're sent to somewhere called the pit, whatever that is. But they don't like it. They'll cause selective forgetting again. So if you give a client these exercises to do to weaken the voices, they'll constantly make them forget, to do those exercises. Any negative thought about yourself or anybody else comes from them. That's a rule of thumb. They don't want you to have a positive self-concept. They'll do anything they can to destroy that. They'll attempt to pull the victim away from consensual reality, into their strange version of reality. They use confusion as a means of instilling negative suggestions. They'll get the patient confused, and then they'll throw in a suggestion. Well, do this, that'll solve the problem. And then they head off in a negative direction. They're averse to anything positive or beautiful. And they're energetic parasites. You talk to schizophrenics, they'll say after they're attacked by these voices, their energy level just drops down to nothing.
Sure.
So I'm going to turn it over to Anon now, but what I'll do is I'll be bursting in. So Anon's got his story. That's one person. So I'll be coming in every once in a while and saying, well, hey, this doesn't just apply to, Anon. This applies to all schizophrenics. It's not just a single thing. It's a generic pattern.
I would say it applies to everyone who's alive these days. That's been my experience in one degree or another.
Yeah.
Has whether you're a schizophrenic, maybe we're all kind of schizophrenic just by being on this planet at this moment. Seems to feel that way to me sometimes.
It sure does.
So I kind of remained silent up to this point because I'm listening to everything that Jerry's saying. I'm kind of reliving some of this stuff as he's talking about. I mean, his points are right on. And I credit to him for actually starting to recognize that there were patterns here, repeatable patterns that are occurring. And, you mentioned about, we're all a little schizophrenic in some way, shape, or form. I was taught that when you go above a certain threshold, when you can no longer function in life, that's when your archetype or your personality starts to become problematic. So I guess let me go into my story, kind of how I got there, and when I reached the point when I was actually diagnosed with affective schizophrenic disorder, and that was about 30 years ago. So I grew up in kind of a dysfunctional family. So there was a lot of trauma going on. And that's one key note that a lot of schizophrenics have come from dysfunctional families or from traumatic situations where they've dealt with trauma.
And he's right on there. Now, the psychiatrist will say, oh, it's a genetic disorder, or it's through this or through it's trauma. I mean, virtually every schizophrenic I've worked with has had a horrible sexual, physical, or emotional trauma. You know, lots of trauma.
Oh, and I heard the same thing. Oh, it's a chemical imbalance. I looked at the people that were telling me that, and I said, well, then what's the baseline that is reference off of it? They gave me blank stares. They couldn't answer that question. Because if it's a chemical imbalance, okay, then there has to be a baseline that you're basing off of, where it's off of. You know, where are the indicators? They couldn't tell me anything on that. They just said, oh, it's a chemical imbalance. I also heard, oh, it's genetic. So growing up, I encountered a lot of, I would say there was abandonment, death in my family. There was drug abuse, emotional abuse, narcissism, codependency. I grew up in an environment where there was a lot of cocaine around, pills, marijuana. And I tried not to, I was aware of it, but I tried not to partake of it to a great extent. I was offered cocaine several times before I was even a teenager. And I think I tasted once in my gum just to see what it tasted like. I was offered drug dealerships several times in high school, but there was, I guess, a higher part of me that said, I didn't want this type of life, that I valued my brain. I wanted my mind for future use. So I stayed away from this stuff. There was death in my family. My father died in my arms. I lost two grandparents all within like a two or 3 or 4 year period. So there was a lot going on, a lot of dysfunctionality. There was abandonment going on. There was a whole mess. And I knew that my family was there was a tough situation that was growing up in, and I kind of wanted to get out of it. So that's why I grasped onto education, because I felt educating myself, throughout high school, and I was fortunate enough to be able to go to college. That was my way out of getting out of that situation. So I went for a degree in mechanical engineering, and ironically enough, I took some courses on psychology while I was getting my degree. I took a general psychology, comparative psychology, and abnormal psychology. So I knew of these different psychosis diagnoses. I knew of DSM. I even knew a little bit about schizophrenia.
What's DSM?
So
the Diagnostic Statistics Manual. It's the manual where they make up all these diagnoses of all these mental illnesses, and they're all made up. There's not one single test for any of them, and there's hundreds and hundreds of them in there. Probably over 300 at this point, and not a single test that will conclusively identify any of them. They're all subjective, made up.
It's used as an insurance code to put down on the paperwork and documentation for what your diagnosis is. Because when somebody's depressed, they might not be just depressed. There's a whole spectrum of things going on. It could be a little bit of depression, could have been bipolar, a little bit of a schizophrenia. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different things all blended in. But I think the DSM, it tries to classify it. I don't think it's that accurate, though.
No.
So I was in my mid-20s. I graduated from college about 1989, 1990. And I guess what was happening, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in my mind at the time. I'll just touch on the tip of the iceberg a little bit, but there's a lot of stuff going on. It's almost like I was waking up to some of the abuse that was going on. Suppressed emotions were waking up. I actually had some time to kind of figure out who I was. Growing up, I was kind of doing what I could to take care of my family, so I didn't really have time to be a child a lot of times. And everything was starting to wake up in my head, and I started to get really depressed. And it's almost like something was telling me that I was a failure. Give it up, give up what you want to do in life. You're no good. You're not going to go anywhere. And I started to read the Bible over this point in time because I wanted to read and understand for myself what it said without any middlemen telling me or explaining me what it's about. So I was baptized Greek Orthodox. I attended a little bit of Greek Orthodox Sunday school when I was about 5, 6, 7 years old. And during elementary school, I attended a Methodist Sunday school. And about the age of 13 to about the age of 18, I was actually in a Catholic youth group. And I wasn't Catholic, but they were very open. It was a good community group just to kind of a place for young kids to hang out, to kind of develop themselves as human beings, as individuals. So I had a little bit of a religious upbringing. I wouldn't say it was dogmatic. I would say it was more just about, my view was there's more to this world than just the material realms. And so I had a pretty strong faith. And as I started going through this stuff in the 1991, it was like something was, I would almost say it felt almost like something was trying to take over, or possession. I remember even at the time thinking to myself, wow, you know, the abnormal psychology book says it's this and this and this, but boy, this sure feels like something's trying to take over my mind and body. I mean, there were times where my arms and legs were moving and I wasn't the one moving them. It was like
I've heard that, and I've heard that a number of times. You know.
Something else was just trying to move them. So I started to get super, super depressed, to the point of I was seeing in black and white. I could no longer taste food, and I was losing a lot of weight. It's like I was just going downhill. I remember all of a sudden I started to feel very, very worthless. Like no one would be my friend in my head. My mind was starting to tell me no one would be my friend. You have no value to offer anybody. Who'd want to be your friend, type of thing. And I didn't isolate myself in high school, college. I mean, I had friends and classmates that I hung out with, kids in the neighborhood and everything like that. So it wasn't like I was antisocial or anything like that. But this stuff started, and it's almost like, I guess, alternate personalities I felt like were kind of coming out a little bit. It wasn't who I normally was, let's put it that way. So I started to, I would say, psychologically crash, for lack of a better word. There was a lot of stuff going on. I think that I was being put on lithium about a month before I was admitted to the psychiatric hospital. But I remember I crashed so hard, but I felt like I was no longer sleeping at all anymore. Like something was keeping me up and just tormenting me. At times it was very exhilarating what was going on, and other times it was terrifying. But I crashed and I ended up in the psychiatric hospital for 4 weeks. I think it was September of 1990. And I mean, I was at rock bottom. I was suicidal. I was thinking that I was worthless, that I had failed. I was a failure in life. Give it up. And
now were those the voices? Could you tell at that point whether those were separate from who you were, or you didn't know yet, because they try to blend in with your regular thought processes?
Yeah, I was going back and forth. I was going back and forth that, what, these are my own thoughts? No, this is something external. I kept going back and forth on that fight type of thing to try and figure out what was going on. I mean, at the time, I even knew this is madness. I mean, I was aware that my mind was not right. So, I mean, I stayed away from all alcohol. I stayed away from everything, marijuana, any type of recreational drugs during this time period, because I knew my mind wasn't right. And I knew that I had to get it back on my own. I didn't want to cover it up with using some artificial substances or chemical substances to deal with it. So I was in the psychiatric hospital. I mean, that's a little bit of hell and heaven at the same time. I remember they just kept giving me all sorts of different pills to try and drugs to try.
Did you go in voluntarily by yourself? You decided at the time? Or?
Yeah, I would say voluntary. What happened is actually my family had brought me to the emergency room that night because my body was thrashing all over the place. It was almost like something was inside me, moving me around. I couldn't really speak anymore. I had a tough time getting out any thoughts or words. So I was fortunate enough. I had health insurance still at that point in time. I was unemployed.
So that to jump in there a second, that's the process where they're starting to take over. And these people you see that go out and they just start shooting everybody out on the streets, or they stab somebody 57 times, or, that's the voices who have taken them over. Anon is talking, well, it made my arm move, made my leg move. They will move toward taking over your entire body, and they won't quit until they get there, unless you do something to prevent that.
Yeah, it definitely felt like a possession was in process. I'll say that much. And I mean, I'm an engineer. I have a very logical mind. I'm a little bit of a scientist too in my own head, but I can't deny what I went through and what these things felt like. So in the psychiatric hospital, I remember they kept trying to get me to snap out of it, and I guess they gave me different pills. Nothing was working, and I remember some of these pills were they're basically just sedatives. I felt, because I remember sometimes, they had these different side effects, like very dry mouth. There was a couple of days that I don't even remember what went on in the psychiatric hospital, and this didn't work. That pill didn't work. It was like a kaleidoscope of different pills, different combinations they kept giving me to try and snap me out of what was ever going on.
And how much time did the psychiatrist spend talking to you?
It wasn't much. I mean, I think sometimes it might have been 20 minutes a week. Other times it might have been 20 minutes every other day.
Yeah, that's about standard. You know, they just dish out drugs. They're big pharma's drug pushers.
And I know how Jerry mentioned that being bored is one of the worst things for a schizophrenic. And I remember in the psychiatric hospital, they had kind of an art therapy room. And I knew that when I was doing that a little bit, I felt better because it gave myself something to focus on. And some of the nurses there were rather nice. They actually let me go in there by myself when the class wasn't going, because they trusted me enough. And I was able to just kind of do some pottery work and that sort of thing. But that was getting my mind focused on doing some creative stuff that helped me kind of feel a little bit better at the time. And I remember I was exhausted from these attacks. And I remember the doctors kept asking me, are you hearing voices? Are you hearing voices? And I didn't want to say yes. I kind of said, well, I'm hearing voices, but it's just like, because I haven't been sleeping, it's just like a weird dreamlike state. I didn't say that, these voices are talking or telling me anything. Because I was still going back and forth. Are these my own thoughts, or is this something external of myself attacking me? Now, there was about a 48-hour period, 2 days, when I was in the psychiatric hospital, where I generally was hearing voices, and they were outside of my mind.
And so after those attacks, you felt drained.
I didn't want to get out of bed. I mean, I was exhausted.
Now, were you able to attribute that? Most people can't. Were you able to attribute that to the voices, or was it just like a conundrum? Like, where'd my energy go? I didn't use it. What happened? Did you think about it at all, or did you just kind of, in the confusion, you didn't even pay any attention to it?
I think probably my state of confusion, I didn't really pay attention to it. I just knew I could not get myself out of bed. It was exhausting just to lift like lead feet type of thing, even to go for a walk. But once you were able to get yourself moving and got yourself away from the isolation, you felt yourself, you improved a fraction. I mean, it did make things feel a little bit better.
So did you feel helpless the whole time, or was there an opportunity?
I felt like my life was over. I mean, it's the stigma of having been admitted to a psychiatric hospital, first of all. And it's like, who's going to hire me? How am I going to get my life back together? I have no money. I'm unemployed.
I mean, with the voices, did you feel they were overwhelming you every time, or that you had an opportunity to listen or not listen, depending on these, let's say, suggestions they were making?
Well, they were, there was later on, after I got out of the psychiatric hospital, they actually got a little bit stronger and more definitive in what their attacks were. But I do remember for a period of about 48 hours in the psychiatric hospital, I mean, it was like a cacophony. I was hearing men's voices, women's, children's constantly talking. Now, I was trying not to pay attention to them because I didn't want to feel like they were influencing me a little bit. They might have been trying to get my attention. They might have been talking about me. And it's almost like when you're in a play or a movie theater before the show's about to start, you hear everybody having their own little conversations going on, talking on a cell phone. That's kind of what it felt like. There were all these conversations going on. And, but they were I remember hearing children's voices too. And I was like, well, that's weird. I'm hearing young voices, old voices, men's, women's, and everything else going on. So none of the drugs or pills were working at all. They're trying to get me out of my condition. I mean, I remember one time I was actually walking in the hallway, and I walked right into a wall, and I kept walking against the wall. And I remember thinking, this must look ridiculous. I started laughing at myself too, but I could not find a train of thought to turn and reposition my body and go in a different direction. It's like something else was doing it. It wasn't me. So I kind of had to go in a split state of mind to deal with some of this stuff. Part of me was the participant who was encountering all this stuff. And part of me was the observer, like the scientist inside me, like paying attention to what was going on, take mental notes a little bit. So none of the pills were doing anything. They just, I mean, the pills are basically just tranquilizers. They're sedatives. I remember sometimes being on the sedatives where I couldn't really communicate with the outside world, but all the stuff was still going on in my head.
So was the observer then just you, like the intelligent, strong you that wasn't in the hospital, or what do you mean by observer?
I think the observer was the aspect of me saying, "This is nuts. I really am mad, but I want to see where this goes." I was like, "Wow, I learned about this stuff in college, and here's I'm encountering this stuff first on." And the participant was actually the target or the victim dealing with some of this stuff head on. So none of the pills were working. Finally, they had to resort to, as a last resort, they decided to give me ECT, which is electroconvulsive therapy. That's what they actually shocked the brain a little bit. Now, it was very different than what you saw in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, even the 1980s, thank goodness. It's almost like going to surgery. What they did is they give you a muscle relaxant, and they gave me anesthesia, kind of knocked me out. And then they give the brain a mild shock, and they run electric current through it. Now, they have to give you the muscle relaxant because you actually convulse so hard you'll break bones or your whole body will shake and you can tear ligaments and everything else. And because they're giving you a muscle relaxant, you can't breathe on your own anymore. So they also have to put like a respirator on you to breathe for you at the same time. So it was interesting. After the very first ECT treatment, I was still an inpatient then, I felt better. I was still at rock bottom, but I felt like that the thoughts had subsided. It wasn't as strong. I felt more like myself. And I remember telling them, I said, "Look," I said, I'm feeling better. I said, I can rebuild myself from here. And they're like, no, you need 5 more treatments. So they had to give me 5 more treatments, but I would have to say that it worked, at least temporarily. It got me to a point where I could at least function on my own a little bit more so and feel like myself. So I was released the end of September 1990. They assigned me a psychiatrist and a psychologist. So the psychiatrist prescribed the medications. I think they put me on a low dose of Klonopin at the time, which they told me was kind of a mood stabilizer. And I was seeing a counselor, and it was more for codependency issues, trying to break away from the family dynamics that I was in.
Could I ask about the shock therapy before we move away?
Sure.
Like maybe Jerry's professional opinion. Why do you think it seemed like it worked at the time, Jerry? Do you have an opinion on that?
They don't like shock. That's why they don't like the rubber band around, when you pull the rubber band and snap it, they don't like a sharp shock. And there was a dentist in the 1920s who was experimenting with this, and he would get a static shock generator and he would shock the person hearing voices, and his wife was a psychic. So the shock would drive them out of the patient. Then his wife would pick them up and talk them into the light. And once they talked him into the light, that voice was gone. Which was real interesting. I saw in the state hospital that ECTs would keep the voices away for, hours or days even, but they do damage to the brain. A neurologist can tell from even one shock what the damage is. So they will eventually come back. But they don't like that. I heard they don't like negative air ionizers also, but that came from some patients. I've never tried it. I don't know.
Interesting.
So they did tell me that would affect my short-term memory a bit, and I do remember I couldn't remember if I ate lunch or not on a few days and that sort of thing. But I had a total of six treatments. Maybe it did affect my brain a little bit, but I've been able to function normal enough in life. So I'll chalk it up that it was. I would say that it was successful for me. It at least got me to a point where I could at least restart again. So I was seeing a counselor, and I wasn't telling her everything that was going on in my head. I mean, there was so much going on. I didn't want to tell her that I'm still encountering these, I call them strong thoughts. But it was almost like a series of tribulations or trials were starting now. So this was probably late fall of 1990. And the first one it was like it was offering me mammon, a path to instantaneous wealth, power, and riches if I essentially kind of sold my soul or gave up what I thought my life quest should be.
Hmm.
It's like these tormentors were trying to make a deal with me. And, I understand that Jesus went through some of these similar experiences. It's 40 days in the desert, being offered wealth of the world and everything. And I'm thinking to myself, I have a religious upbringing, and here I am going through some of these same things that led to Jesus went through. I'm like, man, I really am mad. This is crazy. This is nuts.
Well, I had something similar where the voice came out of one guy and told me they would give me a lottery ticket number, and I went, no, I don't want anything to do with you.
So, I mean, I was below poverty level that year. My income was below poverty level. I was basically putting everything on cash advances on my credit card. I wasn't having a fun time. I was just using the credit cards, doing cash advances to pay for my health insurance, to pay for whatever rent, to pay for whatever food I needed or gas thing, and medicine. So it wasn't going towards fun stuff. It was really just survival. And it made me, these voices or the very strong thoughts was trying to make this offer. And I said no to it. I mean, it was tempting, but it actually showed me a way through a business model how to do there, how to get to that point. And it was like making promises that I'd be provided with this wealth, power, and riches if I stopped going the direction that I was headed. But I basically would have to essentially sell my soul or give away myself to it in a sense. So that went on about a month or two. Then it backed off, and there was like a next stage was a different attack, and this is one of the most challenging, I would call it a prosecuting attack to defend against. It made me feel extreme guilt and shame, almost the verge of ending my existence. I mean, I was suicidal. It was pointing out every crime in life that I'd ever committed, however minor. It would list every morsel of meat that I ever ate, every fly and a worm that I killed. I mean, it actually went into my thoughts and showed me how I used to go fishing as a kid, fish for trout or bass or sunnies, and you'd have to hook the worm. Well, these strong thoughts were showing me how I had killed an earthworm when I had put the hook in it, and how a terrible being I was that I didn't deserve to live. See, you humans, you kill things all the time. And I started defending myself against these really strong voices. I said to myself, God created me with teeth, tongue, and mouth. Do I have not the right to use them? I said, why is meat made to taste flavorful and provides the most amount of proteinic energy per volume? Why does God encourage some animals to kill and eat other animals for sustenance? And I said to these very strong thoughts, I mean, it was a mental battle. I said, take your arguments to God, not to me. And this archonic attack, it went on for quite a while. I'm using the word archon now.
See, and this is one thing that Anon did that all schizophrenics need to do. They need to fight back, because these things are like gangsters or bullies. They'll just keep kicking you. They'll knock you down and they'll just keep kicking. You have to get up and fight back. Virtually everything they tell you that's a lie. You got to repeat that's a lie. There's a series of exercises you can do to weaken them, but you got to get up and resist them. You can't. You got to fight back. You can't just give in to them or they'll take you over.
Yeah, it's a spiritual battle, and you got to defend yourself, and you have the right to defend yourself against them. I remember back in high school, you know how the bullies could kind of sense the kid that had a tough time at home or that sort of thing, and they would gang up on him? It's the same idea with these, I'll call them entities. They can sense those that are suffering from trauma, and it's almost like sharks being attracted to a wounded fish. They go after them because they feel like it's easier for them to get in and take over their minds a little bit. Now, during these attacks, it wasn't like I was just defending myself against them. There was at times I felt like I was defending all of humanity, like acting almost as an advocate or defense attorney. Later attack, it kept stating how worthless and pathetic humanity and I are. It kept saying that we're insignificant lumps of flesh destined to rotting and being eaten by bacteria and worms. Now, I counter-argued. I put up a defense to it. I said, look, we were created that way by the divine hand. We didn't decide the composition of our flesh, blood, and bones. We didn't determine how our bodies were built or made. It was granted or forced upon us. I said in defense to these attacking thoughts, I said, how can you condemn our form when we had no say or control over its creation? I said, take your arguments to God, for that's where you'll find the answers, not to me. And this was interesting because my defense was so strong on this, it withdrew its stance right away. That attack stopped almost immediately. I don't know if it was the same entity, different entities doing the attack, or if they're all kind of one and the same. There's different thoughts on that, different ideologies. So these attacks would continue. It was going on until like the spring of 1991, and I was suicidal at this time. I mean, I really was. This was telling me to kill myself, that I was worthless. There was times I actually got the hoses out and connected to the exhaust pipe on my car and was putting the duct tape on and everything. And sometimes these thoughts would tell me how to commit suicide. Like one of them wanted to have a very dramatic effect. It kept telling me to go climb a high tension electrical tower and jump off into the wires and just let your body hang there. So I guess it was going for a dramatic effect or that sort of thing. I think what kept me from actually committing suicide is I had some younger nieces in my family, and I just felt like if I did that, it would give them a permission slip to do the same thing if they ever found tough times in life. And I had a little compassion. I had some compassion left in me. I didn't want to do that to them. So without them knowing it, they kind of helped save my life a little bit just by their existence.
Well, the statistics are schizophrenics kill themselves at 3 to 5 times that of the general population. Exactly for what the reason you're saying is the voices tell them you're no good, you're worthless, you're a burden to everybody. Why don't you just kill yourself and get it over with? Go ahead, do it now.
Can I ask you what the baseline then is for deciding someone's schizophrenic or not? I mean, that I'm curious about, since there's no, how do you make that judgment?
Oh, there's a whole bunch of stuff. Basically it's what the psychiatry says, it's a break from consensual reality.
What would you say?
Well, there's a lot of things. It's kind of like Anon is saying, all those symptoms. Now there's a bunch of different kinds of, they have different classifications, but along with schizophrenia goes depression and anxiety and all the rest of them, and what Anon was describing at the beginning was a bipolar process where you go up and down, up and down. So there's symptoms for each class, but they're kind of like classes of human behavior that they have taken and they have turned into a pathological description. It's almost like they can make anything pathological. Anything you do, they can make it some kind of syndrome or disorder or some kind of mental illness, and they just dream these things up and put them in their catalog, put a number on it, and then they can charge insurance for it.
Anon, I'm curious about one thing. Since you've been through the system, how would you say schizophrenia would be reflected on the general population? Now that you've gone through it, and maybe who you interact with on a daily basis, or how would you say everyone, perhaps in some degree, is afflicted with it, Anon?
Well, these voices hit us all.
It's to the degree. For example, ever walk by, like you're walking on a bridge or something like that, and you also get the strong thought, jump off.
Yep.
Okay, why the heck would your mind even go there? I think that those entities they're testing. They're testing.
That's
to see how you'll react to it. After I got out there, sometimes when I started to heal, there were times where those voices would say things, or those strong thoughts. I'd kind of laugh at it. I'm like, yeah, right. Good luck. I'm not doing that.
They hate to be mocked. They hate to be mocked.
I think people, they test their targets or victims to see if they're vulnerable. So another prosecuting attack, it kept trying to convince me how I and humanity did not deserve to exist. It was like something that entered my mind. I was judging all of humanity based on my experiences. I actually saw like almost cinematography or movie-like showing like battles and wars and all the horrible things that humans have done throughout history. I mean, it was almost like it was flashing before my eyes sometimes that was going on. So I was becoming a star witness during these tribunals. I was seeing the history of humanity, and it was showing our species' derelict and dysfunctional behavior through my eyes. And it would say, as it's showing these scenes, saying, see, humanity is an abomination. They will never evolve. They don't deserve to exist. It kept stating that humanity was worthless and ignorant creation. And I would stand up to this inquisitor. I would defend against them. I would say, yes, you're right. There's some humans that are evil, wicked, ignorant, and full of hatred. I said, but there are others that are good, compassionate, kind, and full of love. I put forth my defense that you don't condemn an entire species, religion, or culture as being entirely imperfect or defective based on the actions of a few. And I mean, it really was like I was putting up a defense against these thoughts and these entities. So that attack would stop, and the next stage would come on. Now, I felt like the entities were taking different approaches. In other words, almost the words they were using were different. So I almost felt like it was different forms of them, because they would change kind of like, I guess, how they would talk or present the thoughts to me. It was almost like I felt like they were different. It wasn't one and all the same all the time. So another stage was telling me, why even bother trying to guide humanity with the knowledge being given to you? They won't listen to you. You will never change. They'll never change. They only laugh and mock you. You'll be a failure from the start. And it said, if you tell anybody about us, they won't believe you. They'll just put you on more drugs.
And that's a common one too. They tell virtually all schizophrenics, if you tell anybody about us, you're going to be in trouble. They'll drug you. They'll lock you up. So, and in effect, that's kind of what happens.
So, I mean, I kept my mouth shut about these experiences. I mean, it's just recently I'm starting to talk about them because, hey, I didn't want to end up in a mental institution for the rest of my life. And, some of those tranquilizers and sedative drugs they're putting people on who've been diagnosed with schizophrenia, it's not helping them. It's hurting them.
No, it's toxic. It's actually shrinking their brain with long-term use, and they won't tell the patients that either. They know it. They won't tell them.
Now,
when they start showing psychiatric symptoms, they dump another drug on there, Cogentin or something else, to block the damage that the patient is experiencing from the antipsychotic, so they don't feel it while the damage continues. It's bad. It's bad.
For short-term use, okay, it's like a Band-Aid.
Yeah.
You're covering up the wound, but the wound's probably still festering, getting infected underneath the Band-Aid. You got to get to the wound itself, and that's what needs to be done more so. As I said, the drugs, the psychotropic drugs, okay for temporary use, not for long-term by any means. So these thoughts, I kept saying that I was a fool, and I said, why do you want to be the fool? I said, being the fool is my choice. I said, yeah, but why do you want to be the fool? And I said, for the love of humanity. And I felt this thought is true. I mean, your allegory of Plato's cave, for example, how when you try to show people a greater truth or a higher reality, they rebel. It's terrifying to them because it means they have to give up a sense of their old self. Their previous self has to almost die away a little bit to be able to bring on a new perspective on things. So in a way, what these archonic thoughts were talking about, it's kind of true. People don't like to be let out of Plato's cave. So the next final battle or thought, it was almost like trying to destroy any religion that I had, any faith that I had in God. It was trying me to give up a belief, essentially, in God or some sort of higher consciousness.
And that's consistent.
And it was telling me I was worthless and everything else. And by this point, I was exhausted. I mean, I've been doing this for like a year and a half, 2 years now. I was mentally, psychologically exhausted. I was ready to give up. I really was getting closer and closer to killing myself. So I started praying to God, or the highest essence of what I thought God was. I said, look, God, I'm going through these weird mental illnesses. I don't know if this is something more profound or if it's just madness, but I need a sign from you that you exist. I need a sign this isn't all just madness in my head. So I prayed so intensely for about 2 weeks. And I didn't care what the sign was. I just need some proof that God existed. Because if I got that proof, I felt I could go on with dealing with these battles. I do. Because keep in mind, these thoughts are telling me now that God does not exist, that religion's are all fake. They're false. They're not real. It's all made up delusions. So this went on for about 2 weeks that I did intense praying, just to, give me a sign. I need to know. And I didn't know what the sign was going to be. I didn't ask for what the sign, specifically what the sign was to be. If a priest knocked on my door, I would have accepted that. If a Bible arrived by UPS to my address by mistake, I would have accepted that. So this is approaching autumn, fall of 1991. And I was doing probably the most intense praying I ever did in my life. And then I woke up about 2 a.m. one night. And that's the thing. A lot of these attacks occur between 2 to 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Where very strong negative thoughts, they're not letting you sleep. I mean, they're keeping up at night, making you feel anxious. And I kept going back and forth that, okay, this is just my mind playing tricks on me, or there's something more profound going on. This is something external to me doing this.
That time limit, that time span is very common for them to attack between 3 and 4 in the morning. It's common. It's very common.
So I woke up about 2 a.m. with the feeling that there was a presence in my room. Now, if you want to do screen sharing now, I can actually give a presentation of I'll call it the hallucination or the vision that I encountered.
Okay, you should be able to share anytime.
Okay, let me pull this up. So I create a little PowerPoint presentation, and forgive my rough artistry here. See if I can get it to work. Can you see the presentation?
I can.
Okay. So I mentioned I woke up about 2 a.m. with the feeling there's a presence in my room. I looked around, I didn't see anything, but I felt like something was there, and it was very, very intense, whatever it was. So I'm lying there in bed. I look up at my ceiling, and the square ceiling lights there fixture. So there's a square ceiling light fixture. So I knew I was in my room. And then all of a sudden, I start to see like this smoke or like silver grayish fog start to enter my room to the left of the ceiling light. And I'm thinking, oh, great, there's electrical fog occurring in the ceiling. But it wasn't happening where the wires were. And nothing was browning. I didn't really smell smoke or anything. But more and more, this fog starts coming into the room. I'm thinking to myself, great. Here it was about a year ago, I was diagnosed with having affective schizophrenic disorder. Now I'm having a visual hallucination. So the scientist in me, the observer, said, okay, let's see where this hallucination goes. Let's see what happens. Let's see what my mind's going to show me. So more and more this fog is coming into the room. It's kind of silverish, grayish, darkish, and it's moving almost like the way ink would move through water or a fluid. It wasn't moving like smoke. I don't know if it was alive itself. And as this is happening, I actually closed my eyes and shook my head back and forth a few times like that, to try and snap out of it. But when I opened my eyes back up, more and more of this fog had come into this room. So I couldn't stop the hallucination, if that's what it was. And I started to see this dark portal open up within the fog. And it started to get larger and larger. It was rather oblong and oval. And I could see that the fog or the smoke or the cloud was entering along the inside circumference of this portal that's opening up. And the portal is very dark. I couldn't really see into it. Part of me is a little terrified, like, what is going on here? The other part of me is curious. Okay, let's see what's going on here. So I'm looking at this portal. The room's filling up with this fog. I can't really see anything as I'm looking into it. It's very dark. All of a sudden, whoosh, I see these two serpentine tails move from bottom to top within the portal. I was like, whoa, okay. I was thinking to myself, whatever it is, it's on the other side of that portal. It's not in my room, but I spoke too soon on that one. So more and more the fog's coming in, and it was almost like two snake-like tails. I don't know if this thing seemed to have two separate spines, or somehow they were adjacent to each other. And it's kind of just moved up. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, is my mind trying to tell me that I have some sort of subconscious fear of snakes? And I wasn't aware of that because I grew up near the woods. I used to hold frogs, turtles, snakes, lizards all the time with no problems. My college roommate had a pet boa constrictor I used to hold all the time with no fear. So I don't think it was a fear of snakes. So the portal became obscured, almost like the way a full moon becomes obscured at night by the clouds. I knew it was there, but there was this large like cloud like substance in the room or fog. And then all of a sudden I see the snake like serpentine movements move within the fog itself. And I'm thinking, crud, this thing's actually in my room now, whatever it is. And I'm watching, and there's movement in the fog, in the cloud. And then for a little while, the cloud gets a little bit bigger. And then this thing comes out, starts moving across my field of vision from left to right. And I'm looking at it. And now I was seeing snake-like movements. So if I'm having a hallucination, I would have expected to have seen like a snake-like head on this thing. It didn't have a snake-like head. It was mammalian. It was almost like lion or dog-like from the side. This is kind of what it looked like. And you can see I drew kind of a line there to show like the two, it looks almost like two spines coming down or it was adjacent to each other. So that's what it initially looked like in my room. And I started kind of laughing to myself. I'm thinking, oh, great. Here it is. I'm diagnosed as being schizophrenic. I have a hallucination. My mind comes up with a snake with a dog, like lion, like head on it. I was thinking, what next is going to come out of the cloud? A rabbit on a turtle's body or something like that? So it's going across my field of vision from left to right. See this right here? That's an amulet that I found on the internet within the last few years. And it's of something called Chnubis, Chnoubis, which is actually an Egyptian god, but it's also known as the Gnostic Demiurge, Abraxas, or Yaldabaoth. It goes by several different names. And it looked very similar to what I saw coming out of my room that night. And I had no idea what this stuff was until about 3 years ago when I counted stuff on the internet. I said, oh my gosh, this is what I saw that night in my room. But it almost has like a mammalian face to it. It's like, looks like a kind of a lion or dog-like. And then the two vertebrae seem to come down out of it. I think this amulet might be from, I don't know, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th century. But if your audience types in Chnubis, Chnoubis, or Yaldabaoth, that's a mouthful. That's spelled Yaldabaoth. They'll see these images as well. It's almost like a creature, god or demon that has a lion-like face and a dog-like body. So this thing comes into my room and it turns and faces me head on. And the face was very, very much like a lion, almost like a mangy cat. It looked beat up. I mean, I could see whiskers on it. I could see stubble. And its left eye looked like it'd been in a cat fight. It almost looked like it might have been blind in its one eye, or at least there was some scratching or markings there. And I'm thinking, I was scared at this point, but I wasn't completely terrified because it's just okay. This is just some sort of snake-like thing with a lion face on it. What's the big deal? But it felt evil, or at least that's the way my mind was interpreting it. And then all of a sudden, the face changes as it's coming at me. It changed into something very grayish, prune and wrinkled, hobgoblin-like. It was terrifying. It almost became like an old hag or old man of decay. Remember, the face was very prune-like, like it was trying to terrify me, and it was opening its mouth with like a howling, screaming expression, like it was coming to devour me. For a second there, every cell in my body was at the most intense point of terror or fright that it could have been at. And I really thought this was the moment of where my existence was going to cease. I thought I was going to die from this attack, whatever it was. But I said to myself, I had a higher thought. If this thing is evil, I didn't want to go out of the world feeling the way I was, feeling terrified by this thing. So I did the exact opposite. I lowered my ego. I just projected love onto it. That was the only thing I had left in me. So I projected love onto this entity, whatever it was. And all of a sudden, it vaporized or pulverized. It disappears. Now the cloud's still there. The cloud's dissipating a little bit. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, I'm still here. What the heck was that? Next thing I know, there's a different face hovering overhead. It had kind of a white porcelain mask-like look to it. There was some fluttering going on, almost like it was a being of consciousness. It almost looked like a heat mirage was going on behind it. Like reality was changing behind it, but there was this white mask in front of it, and it was sheer beauty. I couldn't capture it with my artwork here, but it was the type of beauty that I felt like I was not deserving to look at. It was almost illuminated, but it wasn't aware of my presence. I could tell that. Like I was aware that it was there, but it wasn't aware that I was there. And I'm looking at this thing, and I felt like, okay, I felt like I should turn away and not look at it because it wasn't of this realm. But I think the curiosity got the best of me, so I just kind of kept looking at it. I was thinking, okay, that other face turned into something very horrible and tried to terrify me. And I'm thinking, what's this face going to do to me now? And it almost felt like there was like strands, like golden silky wisps in the background, kind of fluttering. I don't know if they were like strands that were releasing or what was happening. I felt like there was fluttering, so it could have been interpreted as wind-like in the front. The white porcelain mask with face, that was definite. That's something I remember 100%. And it was sheer beauty. I mean, it was androgynous. I couldn't tell if it was male or female. I kind of felt it was of a feminine nature, though. But it was undescribable beauty. That's all I can say. And then all of a sudden, it became aware of me. And it had kind of pupilless eyes, sheer elegant beauty, and we're just staring at each other. And it felt like an eternity, but we're just looking at it. And meanwhile, there's like fluttering going on. And I'm waiting to see what's going to happen next. I didn't know where this was going. And this beautiful white porcelain masked entity is looking at me, and the fog is dissipating, the cloud is dissipating. I can still see the portal in the background. The next thing I know, the face turns its lips upwards and it smiles at me. And when it smiled, I actually saw dimples form in the face. And as it smiled at me, I felt this wave of sheer love, ecstasy, erotica, joy, bliss, grace come from it and onto me. It was almost like I was hit with like a tidal wave of love. And as this is all happening, I'm starting to have an out-of-body experience. I'm finding myself kind of like I'm rising out of my body, and like I'm starting to merge with this white porcelain mask entity. And it was the most beautiful creature I've ever seen in my life. Just the way that the face looked. I mean, it was one could say it was angelic in the good sense. So I'm rising out of my body, and I'm starting to merge with this mask-like entity. And at the same time, the entity is reversing back and going into that portal from which that other entity had come out of. And I'm finding myself merging with it, and I'm just in a state of sheer joy, ecstasy, and I will say erotic, not in the physical sense, but in a sensual sense of like I was merging with another being, like we were combining. And well, it told me, I had the sensation that everything was going to be fine in my life, that I had kind of resolved my issues, or I had hope again. And just as I was about to 100% merge my being with this white-faced entity, and just as we were about to cross over into that portal to go beyond into another reality, I fell back asleep. Now, I don't know if it deliberately put me back to sleep so that I could survive whatever was going on in the other realm. I don't know if it was taking a tour of the underworlds or somewhere else. But I fell back asleep, and I woke up about 6 or 7 a.m. in the morning, and I was in a state of religious shock. I'm like, what just happened? Now, I don't know if that was a hallucination. I don't know if it was a vision, or I don't know if those entities had actually materialized in my room. I don't know if there was if they're both the same entity, two sides of the same coin, if that terrifying entity had flipped from evil to something good when I projected love onto it. I don't know if they're two entirely separate entities. That white-faced porcelain mask entity could have been a Sephiroth. It could have been an angel in the benevolent sense. But from that point onwards, I started to heal. The thoughts started to subside quite a bit. I was able to rebuild myself. Because here it is, these entities or these strong thoughts prior to this vision were telling me that God doesn't exist. And then I have this type of vision or hallucination. It basically negated everything that those thoughts were telling me. So I had to apply logic to it. I had to go back to my engineering mind and say, okay, here it is, something's telling me that God doesn't exist. And then this is the type of hallucination or vision that I have after praying for a sign from God. And now, if I was to have like a random hallucination, I'd expect maybe a bunch of balloons floating by or some unicorn dancing through the room. This is something that I did not know what it was. And I mentioned that serpentine entity with the lion-like face is referred to as Chnubis, Abraxas, Yaldabaoth, or the Demiurge for those who are aware of Gnosticism. I wasn't aware of Gnosticism until about 3 years ago. And yet I saw this entity almost 30 years ago. So I have to conclude that there's more to schizophrenia than just mental illness. It's a spiritual battle. I do believe there are both malicious and benevolent entities out there beyond our normal spectrum of vision. You know, the brain is a radio, a receiver, a transmitter, a filter, and a tuner. And we have the reality that we live in, but I think our brains have to also filter out other realities just so that we can function. So for anybody out there dealing with schizophrenia or who knows somebody is, I recommend they treat it as a spiritual battle and to view these entities that they're external of yourself. You know, they're trying to make you feel bad and negative for a reason. You have to stand up to them. You have to defend against them. Talk to them.
That's critical. That's critical. You have to realize that they are not you. They are not who you are. They don't belong to you.
Now, I've been doing a lot of religious research since that encounter because I had to find answers. You know, what was this? I never told anybody about this stuff. The first person I ever told about that vision or hallucination was to my future wife, and that was probably back in 2005. I mentioned it to a friend of mine back in the summer of 2019. And just recently, with Jerry bringing me on some of his presentations, I've been telling the world about it, what I went through, what I encountered. So here it is. I have a vision of something that was talked about or seen almost 4,000 years ago by our ancestors. When you consider the Egyptian Chnubis, or a couple thousand years ago when you consider the Gnostic Demiurge or Yaldabaoth. And it's also referred to as Abraxas. Now, Abraxas is kind of a multifaceted entity. Sometimes it appears with like a rooster face and multiple tails. It's a mutable figure. Sometimes it looks very goblin-like. Now, I don't know if our interpretation of all these entities is correct. It could be multiple entities. There could be a whole species of these things beyond our normal visual range. They seem to live in a world beyond time and matter, outside of our normal space. If you take a scientific approach, you could say that they dwell in subspace. And a lot of religions talk about this stuff in an indirect manner, like they're trying to interpret it, like the different spheres of reality. But I mean, today I'm a well-established, functioning human being. I've got a wonderful family. I was fortunate to be able to pay off my mortgage last year, so I own my house now. I mean, it was a struggle getting back on my feet again from that diagnosis with schizophrenia. I mean, like I said, I was at poverty level. I had to kind of retransition back into this reality. I had to gain a grounding. I mean, we all have to earn a wage, pay our bills and everything. I had to kind of get back into that. So hopefully this discussion will help your listening and viewing audience answer some of their questions and deal with some of their issues, just to realize that, hey, there is a greater reality out there. And there's definitely something going on up in the spiritual realms. I don't know the specific details, but there's definitely some upheaval going on these days. It could be a spiritual battle,
It is.
but there's definitely something more going on. And as human beings, I think we need to work on ourselves to develop our character. Just learn to be decent people. That's really what we have to try and be: to be decent people, to get through trauma and difficult situations in life. And there's hope out there, and we have to grasp onto that hope, use it as a beacon to continue in developing ourselves as individuals and as human beings.
Yeah, there is a cure for schizophrenia, but it's not going to come from these drugs. It's going to come from removing the trauma and understanding what these things are. It's like back when the plague, before they understood it was being carried by rats. They'd walk around with all these masks on and do all these rituals. They didn't understand the cause. So there was nothing they could do about it. The cause for schizophrenia is the voices. It's the voices that drives this disorder. And you get rid of the voices and all symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia vanish with them.
Well, removing trauma, that's an interesting point. If you've read any of the Castaneda books, he talks about doing a recapitulation of your life and reviewing the trauma to kind of get the stress out of your body, to understand what happened and why, and then to move along from that point. Is that kind of what you mean by one of the ways that they can cure the schizophrenia and remove the trauma?
Yeah, there are two new therapies that came out. One came out in the VA they were using the EMDR stuff to get what happens in a trauma. Your ego takes it and buries it. It doesn't want to feel it. It doesn't want to deal with it. It buries it, but it buries it alive. And it creates a negative identity out of that. So anybody with those same traits who approaches you, it's going to be like, you're not going to like them.
What do you mean MDR?
EMDR.
Oh, EMDR.
It's a way to swing the eyeballs back and forth. And one psychologist has been using that in the VA, and they found out that it can bring back put the person suffering from trauma in touch with the dead person that they were remunerating with, and then they can speak to them and say last goodbyes and stuff. The other one is the MACE energy method, which was it's an incredible method. It can go in there and you can get in there and you can deflate that trauma very quickly. It was invented by a merchant ship captain, a merchant marine, not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And it looks at the mind very differently than psychiatrists and psychologists do. It considers the mind only to manufacture images. That it says all the mind does is manufacture images of what you put your attention on. It says your spirit does everything else that's attributed to the mind: the thinking, the analyzing, the speaking, everything else that's attributed to the mind.
Could you spell that?
What's that?
Could you spell the VACE, like how someone could look it up? What was it called again? This method you're talking about?
The MACE energy method.
MACE energy method.
MASE?
Yeah, MACE.
Okay, thank you.
Right. There's a couple of books written about it by John Mace.
Okay.
And there's enough information to basically put it to use in both his books. It gets a lot more complicated when you really get into it, but there's enough in there to put it to use with what he's written. And it's you don't even have to know what the trauma is, and it still works. Of course, they're not adopting it in schools. They took it to the legislature in Australia, and they just, shrugged it off. They took it to one of the universities that said, "Oh yeah, we'll maybe adopt it if you turn over the patent to us." But they're totally ignoring it, and the psychotherapy that they have out there now just doesn't work. This works.
Well, it seems to me they're going the opposite way in schools to instill more trauma instead of.
Yeah. Yep.
Now, you mentioned with the MACE energy method, it's not something you do on yourself, right? You actually need a MACE counselor to guide you through it.
Yeah, because you what affects you is what you don't know about. The stuff that you know about, you can do something about. But this method goes into your subconscious mind with the help of the spirit, finds what's buried and where it's buried, and discharges it. So then it becomes not a trauma anymore, but a memory. It's kind of like, oh yeah, I remember that, but there's no emotional charge to it.
So kind of if you disperse your emotional charges, it would be a good way to heal the trauma and then
Right.
perhaps not be so susceptible to the mind
Right.
monsters.
Right. You know,
Mm,
because the mind monsters trigger that stuff.
mm,
You know, they go in there and they'll trigger it.
They
Somebody else
amplify
comes
it.
around. Yep. And they amplify it. That's exactly right. Something goes wrong, they're right there to pour gasoline on the fire.
well, it's amazing to see a successful participant in this crazy war, spiritual war, as he called it, and to come out on the other side as a victor, which is just very inspiring.
I
Well,
was lucky.
there's
I was
others.
lucky and fortunate.
Yeah, there's others. Sherry Sweeney did it by herself. And there's a number that have recovered on my caseload. It shows it's possible. You know, like Anon said, the drugs help. They tamp it down. They allow us to reach people we normally couldn't reach. You know, past a certain point though, they're gone. You can't reach them. You
Mm.
know, but there's a lot of people you can reach. So the drugs do have their place. If it wasn't for those, there's a lot of people that I wouldn't be able to reach that I can reach with the drugs. But like he says, you shouldn't be on them for long periods of time. They shrink your brain. They kill your nervous system. They're toxic. You know, and psychiatrists know that. They just keep dishing them out anyway. They don't know anything else except dishing out drugs. That's what they're taught.
Seems like any medicine can be that way. In small doses, it could be helpful. In large doses, poisonous. Even
Well, yeah, and this one is particularly insidious because it takes a while to destroy their brains.
Mm.
You know, they shrink like walnuts. They found that in autopsies of long-term schizophrenics. Of course, Big Pharma jumped out there and went, "Oh no, this is not due to our drugs. This is due to the schizophrenia does this." You know, so some laboratory people who weren't connected with Big Pharma started feeding their neuroleptic drugs to monkeys and the rats, and found out that their brains shrunk too. Big Pharma is so very deceptive. They're just so very deceptive. I mean, that's what they're doing is virtually a crime.
I would agree. Well, Anon, is there anything you might like to leave our viewers with? Perhaps we've come to a nice conclusion on this discussion on how you went through it. You were a recovered, as you say, schizophrenic patient. You've come out the other end to have a successful life. If you were going to, leave some advice to any viewers that have gone through or are going through something like that, what would you say to them?
That it's not a life sentence. That you can cure yourself. It takes work, but
Yes.
if you're dedicated enough to do it, you can recover from it and live a very normal, functional life. And I think you'll be better off for it once you get through it. And if I may, I did write a book about some of my experiences, and it's called Revelations on Interstellar Highway 10.
Ooh.
It goes into some of my experiences, but it's more about an individual search for one's soul. It goes into comparative religion. It talks about different things. It's really seeking truth in religious exploration. And my website is astroxrising.com, where if they're interested in the book, they can get it by ebook or a paperback, and it's available on Amazon as well.
Yeah, perhaps you can send me a link and a link to your website, when we're off, and any other information you want to share, and I'll put it below the video when we make it public. I'd be delighted to help promote your book.
Sounds good.
All right. So how about you, Jerry? Is there anything you feel like you should leave the viewers with from this lovely conversation?
Well, yeah, if you want to know more about what the voices are, how they work, how we discovered their individual entities, you can get this book. You can get it from our website at jerrymarzinsky.com. That's MARZINSKY. And this goes from A to Z. It goes, talks about psychiatry and the history of psychiatry and how we discovered the voices are actual entities and not hallucinations. And tells you some things you can do about it.
It's amazing. It's amazing to get some specifics and some things people can do instead of nothing you can do. I hated hearing that my whole life. Nothing you can do, nothing you can do. And talking to both of you gentlemen, you're seeing there's plenty you can do. I'll also leave some links below for the first two talks I did with Jerry, Mind Monsters 1 and 2, very related to this topic and very helpful for what we've done. And, gentlemen, I appreciate your time here today.
Our pleasure.
Okay. Thanks for having us.
All right. So anybody has any questions for Anon or Jerry, please leave the information below. Please like and subscribe. I'll pass them along. keep an eye here for more. I'll be talking with Jerry again in perhaps about 3 or 4 weeks. We'll be doing some more further talks on the mind monsters. And Anon, thank you so much. And I'm encouraging you, perhaps, if you want to share some articles or anything related to what you've done, maybe excerpts from your book, this sort of thing, feel free to share and send them along to us, and we could publish them and help people get a bit of a grip on what you've done and allow them a segue into the healing you've done and how they might be able to help themselves.
Will do.
Yeah, and there's information on how you can help yourself also on our website at jerrymarzinsky.com. Go to articles and blog. That's a live program. Put that to use immediately.
Fantastic. I think there's nothing but help for anyone out there that wants to look for it, that wants to do something. Don't be a victim. Watch and you can see lots and lots of people who have recovered from the monsters and they're schizophrenic and whatever else they want to call their mental challenges, we'll say. And gentlemen, thank you so much for the work you've done and for bringing it out, making it public, and helping people to see that they can even go beyond hope and help themselves to a better life if they so choose to do so.
Okay, thanks for having us.
All right.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. I love you all very much. I thank you guys again, and we'll see you.
Light of my heart. No one tells me where I should start. Free to bust is what I say.